Hello and welcome to episode 405 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Levitan, as always, joined by Evan Silva, and it is August, my friends. The pads are on. Actual news is flowing. Preseason starts this Thursday. Check out our preseason DFS content on the site. Shout out to us. Anyways, Evan, happy August. How's it going?
It's going real well. The news is coming fast and furious today. Irv Smith thumb surgery, questionable for the start of the season. We're closely monitoring this Tim Patrick situation. He went down in a non-contact scenario, and players were kneeling next to him, and it looked potentially serious. I mean, we don't know exactly what it is, but, I mean, there's definitely some concern that this could be a lengthy injury.
Yep, we're recording this Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday, August 2nd in the afternoon, so be aware of that. As I noted, camp is officially underway, and over the last 7 days since we last did a news episode, I mean, we've gotten an absolute avalanche of news. So on today's show, we're going to discuss all of that and how it's changed our outlooks and rankings on players for the upcoming season. Before we get into it, note that this podcast is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. They do have an absurd $2 million to first, $1 million to second place fantasy best ball tournament running right now. If you use promo code ETR when you sign up, they will match your first deposit up to $100. It's really an unbelievable contest, and drafting now is great practice for your home league. So visit Underdog Fantasy and use promo code ETR for up to $100 in free entries. Also, if you have a fantasy draft coming up, a home league, an office league, we can help. Our Draft Kit Pro is indeed live. It's only $49.99, includes all our rankings, best ball, dynasty, season-long props, all our articles leading up to week one. There's a ton of noise and bad rankings and clickbait nonsense out there this time of year. Our job, of course, is not any of that. Our business model is to produce the highest quality rankings and content for people who understand the difference in quality. So be sure to head to the subscribe page to check that out. All right, let's start with all the Bucs stuff that happened last week. In the same day, the Bucs signed Julio Jones, and they announced that Chris Godwin will not start the year on PUP. Now, if you listen to Market Monday yesterday, it doesn't mean that Chris Godwin's going to be ready for week one. In fact, I'd be pretty surprised if he's ready for week one. But I think it's a really good sign for Chris Godwin that he could be back at full strength sometime in September or October. The Julio thing is another debate altogether, as he's 33 years old. Evan, what was your initial reaction to all the Bucs wide receiver stuff that happened last week?
Well, my first thought is we had just done a show where I had Mike Evans number 7 overall. I moved him down to number 12. He's going to end up in the 12 to 15 range. I think I still want to be above ADP on him. He's one of my favorite second round picks now, but I'm not taking him, probably not in the first anymore. Maybe start looking at him right at that 12-13 turn. But that's as the earliest that I would consider him now, because one of the thought process behind him having him so high is that his target competition had lessened considerably. No Rob Gronkowski. Chris Godwin potentially beginning the season on PUP, but he will not begin the season on PUP because he missed even the active PUP. So he's an active participant in practice, not fully. We're not expecting him to play in probably weeks 1 or 2, but we are expecting him back by early October at the latest.
What did you think of Julio last year? Because Julio's 33 years old. And so you guys know me. I absolutely love Julio. He's been one of my favorite players to draft, to play in DFS for so long. I thought he was fine last year. The situation wasn't great. He never really produced big games. He was constantly banged up. Mm-hmm. I don't know that they can rely on him for much more than like a rotational role, but that could look like a really bad take if he is an outlier at his age. So what do you think of Julio last year, and what do you think of him as a Buc?
I just think that he can still be an effective player out there, and this was a great landing spot for him. I mean, getting to play with Tom Brady, hey, if Mike Evans goes down, then they might have to rely on Julio Jones to be, more of a full-time player. But I think that, you couldn't have beaten the landing spot. I had to put him in the top 150. Mm-hmm. And I had to move him into, a draftable range. But I think that when everybody's at full strength in the Bucs receiver core, it's going to be Mike Evans as the X, Chris Godwin as like the movement Z flanker, and Russell Gage as the primary slot. And I think that will be their primary 3 receiver set.
Yeah.
I don't think that Julio will be a part of it.
Right. And I think Julio will rotate in on some clear pass downs and stuff like that. We have him around in the 130s right now in our rankings on Underdog. One guy who I'm watching the ADP on is Russell Gage, because people are like left Russell Gage for dead now. Like, oh, Godwin's back and they have Julio now. There's no way Russell Gage can be effective. I still think Russell Gage can be effective in this offense. He doesn't have the same explosive ability because of where he runs routes and his ability than some of these other guys. But if Russell Gage's ADP dips enough, and I feel like no one wants to draft him now, I'm not giving up on Russell Gage.
I'm totally with you. And he's still going to get a big opportunity early in the season when Chris Godwin is on the shelf to develop a rapport and trust with Tom Brady. And that's invaluable in the Bucs offense.
All right. Let's go to the Deshaun Watson stuff. So Deshaun Watson has been suspended for 6 games. NFL can appeal. They have another 48 hours or so to appeal. I actually don't think that they will. I think this is going to stick around 6 games. I could end up being dead wrong there. But let's talk about this as if Deshaun Watson will only miss the first 6 games and then be back. Deshaun Watson, we have an article up on the site right now. It's so dependent on what kind of league you're in. If you're in a league with really deep benches, it makes a big difference. If you're in a 2 QB league, it makes a huge difference on Deshaun Watson's rank. If you're in a best ball tournament or a season-long tournament where all the money's at the end, it makes a big difference. So I'd encourage people to read the article on the site about how to handle Deshaun Watson. But Evan, I'm curious how you're thinking about Watson and say, also how you now think about Amari Cooper, David.
I think everybody gets a bump. Everybody gets a bump up. I think that as we kind of entered the home stretch of, when the NFL or Sue Robinson was going to issue a ruling on this suspension, it started to become clear that it was going to be like in the 4 to 8 game range. But I think that from a fantasy standpoint, this was a positive outcome for the fantasy values of Deshaun Watson and the rest of the Browns. I mean, and now we have like some definitiveness, because for so long we were in limbo as to how long this suspension was going to be. And actually, we're still kind of in limbo a little bit, for the reasons that you mentioned, that Roger Goodell could actually step in and appeal this and try to make it longer. But I mean, I think that everybody gets a bump up. You get a little bit more confident in Nick Chubb. I think Kareem Hunt stands to benefit. I think that everybody stands to benefit from a fantasy standpoint in Cleveland.
Yeah. I feel like Amari Cooper has been kind of hummed over, glossed over a lot. I mean, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to start, and they're going to play a lot of 2 tight end sets with Harrison Bryant and David Njoku, and that's not a lot of target competition. Now, I do expect them to be very, very run heavy. They have a very easy schedule to start when Joey Brissett is in there, and then Deshaun Watson will come in and obviously give them a boost. So, I'm not opposed to Amari Cooper when he drops in, and Njoku remains a guy that I'm on late when he drops as well.
Yeah, and Donovan Peoples-Jones should start to become a pretty popular late round sleeper. Deshaun Watson doesn't have the greatest arm, but he's a very aggressive downfield passer. And I mean, he could throw the deep ball, and Donovan Peoples-Jones has the speed to go get it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, David Bell is still on the sideline of camp with this foot issue. More injury stuff. James Washington, who, I always thought James Washington maybe didn't get a fair shake in Pittsburgh. Thought he at least had a chance to do some good things in Dallas. Suffers a Jones fracture at camp on Monday. He's going to be out 6 to 10 weeks. I mean, they're really getting thin now, man. I mean, Amari's gone. Gallup has said that he's not going to play in week 1, which makes me think that he's probably not going to be that close to week 2 or week 3 or week 4 either. And so now you have this spot where, like, man, how many targets can CeeDee Lamb get? I mean, can CeeDee Lamb get a 25% target share, a 30% target share? It's not out of the question. Also, shout out to me, I have this Jalen Tolbert ticket on offensive rookie of the year. I believe I got 50 to 1, but some people out there I think got like 100 to 1 or something on Jalen Tolbert, the offensive rookie of the year, which I don't think it's very likely to hit, because I'm not sure Jalen Tolbert is good enough to execute that. But his role should be really good now, assuming they don't sign someone. So a lot going on in Dallas here. What are your thoughts on CeeDee and anything else?
Yeah, I immediately put a little bet on each. CeeDee Lamb to lead the league in receptions and to lead the league in receiving yards at around 15 to 1 on both. CeeDee Lamb is just absolutely set up for success here, and so I love I love being ahead of ADP on CeeDee Lamb. I like having him again ahead of Davante Adams, and I'm standing by that. Looking further down the depth chart, I mean, Jalen Tolbert, 3rd-round pick, he's like locked into the starting lineup at this point. I suppose they could look into Will Fuller, but we don't know if Will Fuller even wants to play at this point. Mm-hmm. Noah Brown, we kind of know his story. TJ Vasher is kind of interesting. He's made he's grabbed some headlines early at Cowboys camp. 6'6", 215, second-year undrafted free agent out of Texas Tech. Just a name to keep in mind.
There was finally, after literally 6 months of no news on Will Fuller yesterday, Aaron Wilson tweeted something to the effect of teams are monitoring Will Fuller's status, and he, we'll see, maybe he'll sign by the end of camp or something like that. I mean, Dallas should be looking to sign this dude. I mean, you couldn't find a better landing spot for Will Fuller. They play in a dome. Dak can throw a very good deep ball. I mean, it's just, it would make a lot of sense. I have no idea if it's going to happen or not, but just be careful with the Jalen Tolbert stuff, because there's at least some chance that Dallas adds Will Fuller or another veteran. Let's go to the Kamara stuff. So as expected, Kamara's hearing was pushed back another 60 days. So now he won't even have a hearing until October. And based on everything I'm reading, if Kamara's lawyers want to push this back through and keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until the end of the season, after the season, they can. And so we're going to do a podcast after this with our round 2 player by player takes. And I continue to move Alvin Kamara up in my round 2 rankings. I think the concern here, Evan, is that you draft Kamara in round 2, and then the video drops. And then at that point, we know when the video drops, that's when everybody starts to actually freak out or respond or whatever. So there's certainly some risk here, but what do you think of the latest on Kamara stuff? I know we're going to talk about him next pod also.
Yeah, there is the risk that this could continue to hang over his head, as the weeks go by, and we lose some clarity with him, because the NFL is not going to come out and announce that that Alvin Kamara is not going to be suspended, right? I mean, this is just going to keep going on. It seems like at this point, although there is that element of uncertainty that could creep into the regular season, that it still seems likely that he's not going to be suspended this year, and that's why I moved him up a couple of weeks ago. I think I've got him at 18 overall.
Yep, 17th,
right now.
17th actually.
17.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not going to move him up again, but I at this point I feel comfortable drafting him in the 3rd round. He usually makes it to the 3rd round. I have him ranked as a 2nd round player though, but you can usually get him in the 3rd round. So that's another reminder. Try to get in some of these drafts. Try to get a feel for ADP. Yeah. Where do guys usually go? I think Alvin Kamara is a fine 3rd round pick.
I think that since yesterday, when this news came out, he's going in the 2nd round. All the drafts I've done since yesterday's hearing got delayed, he goes in the 2nd round. So I think there's going to be a market reaction here. But yeah, I agree that can be ahead of ADP in kind of the middle 2nd round for sure. All right, Bills. So I love Joe Buscaglia, one of my favorite beat writers, covers the Bills for The Athletic. He's been all over this McKenzie versus Jamison Crowder battle. Now, I want to preface this by saying Jamison Crowder missed the entire first week of camp with quote-unquote general soreness. But, I mean, Isaiah McKenzie has been, lighting up Bills camp. And so Joe is saying that, it might – I wouldn't call it this early, but McKenzie certainly has a leg up. I'd also add that, anytime Cole Beasley missed last year, I mean, McKenzie was really, really, really good. And I don't want to give up on Jamison Crowder because I still think he can play also. But McKenzie had some really big games when Cole Beasley was out last year. Obviously, Cole Beasley is gone now. I think it's a sneaky, interesting camp battle that we're seeing between McKenzie and Crowder. How are you seeing it right now, Evan?
Yeah, that context, that layer of context is definitely needed. That Jamison Crowder was out to begin camp. He's also a guy who has dealt with a lot of, soft tissue stuff throughout his career. We talked about how we were somewhat disappointed in how much money Isaiah McKenzie re-signed with the Bills for. Jamison Crowder didn't get a big deal either, So I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. my intuition had been similar to Leone's, and Leone's a big Bills guy, that Crowder was probably going to be the 3 and the main slot guy, and that Isaiah McKenzie would return in that sort of, a little bit of a returner role, a little bit of a gadget guy, but the number 4. But it looks like he's getting a shot to be the number 3. So I'm just going to continue to monitor the situation. I still have Crowder ahead, but I may need to change that.
Yep. Yeah. And that's kind of stuff we'll be watching in preseason. Hopefully we get to see the first team out there and Jamison Crowder healthy and see how they use McKenzie and how they use Crowder for sure. Deebo got his contract. Deebo gets $71 million, 58 of it guaranteed. Now, not a big deal. I don't even think that was really news. I thought that the interesting part of it was that he obviously didn't want, or he wanted to be compensated, and rightfully so. He wanted to be compensated if they continue to use him as running back. He can earn another $1.95 million if he hits certain running back, quote unquote, incentives. So if 49ers want to use him as running back, basically they're going to have to pay $2 million over the life of the contract, which on a $58 million guaranteed contract, it's like nothing, right? So I don't know that that's really going to dissuade them at all. So I don't really have much of a lean here on any impact. I've been very lower than market on Deebo. You can go to YouTube and check out my fades for why. But yeah, what do you think about Deebo's deal and any comments on the running back stuff?
Yeah, last season in the second half of the year, like he got more carries than receptions.
Yeah.
From I think weeks 11 through 18. So, that's I don't think that they're gonna. I think they'll probably scale it back a little bit. But I think what happened here was someone got in Deebo's ear early in the offseason. Contract negotiations were coming up. Someone got in his ear about the carry usage. But I think the sides found some common ground there, and they kind of put it behind them. And now he's going to get a chance to hit free agency again at age 29. But I think that they're going to continue to incorporate him into the running game for sure, just probably not to the extent that they did in the second half of last year.
Yeah, Evan has Deebo slightly below ADP. As you'll hear in the next episode, I have Deebo well behind ADP.
I mean, the big concern here is not even necessarily the running back usage. It is the changing complexion of the 49ers offense and how they could be even more run heavy going forward, and with Trey Lance now incorporated into that.
Let's go to the Ravens backfield, the much talked about Ravens backfield. There's been a lot of speculation, and we've talked about some of these team beat writer stuff. We've talked about the Twitter doctors. Jamison Hensley, I think it was pretty reliable from ESPN. He had a report on Sunday that J.K. Dobbins is actually ahead of Gus Edwards. And, I've been probably more optimistic than the market through this whole process on J.K. Dobbins. I think they're trying to underpromise and overdeliver on his health. Doesn't mean he's a lock for week 1, but I think it's at least promising that he's ahead of Gus. Gives him a chance at least to really have a big workload if he's ready for week 1. Evan, what do you think about the Ravens backfield right now?
That it's pretty cheap. People have not been aggressively drafting J.K. Dobbins. It sounds like J.K. Dobbins is like chomping at the bit to get out there. He's like staying after practice and begging the coaches, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. And that's what you want to see from a guy that's in his situation. But, John Harbaugh was like, well, the doctors are going to decide when he gets to practice. But it sounds like he's awfully close. But, people aren't pulling the trigger on him until like the 7th round. But he's definitely a guy like, and then when he gets cleared, like his ADP is going to go up 2 rounds. So now's the time to draft him.
Yeah. I've been taking him so much. And yeah, I think it's just a bet worth taking with the Ravens very, very likely to be much more run heavy this year, and J.K. Dobbins being such an efficient player. Speaking of running backs going kind of in that range. So this is kind of what I was talking about with like headlines on Twitter and fantasy sites or whatever, kind of spiraling out of control. The headlines were, Miles Sanders has been benched. Miles Sanders is a second stringer now. It's not, it's an overreaction because Kenny Gainwell and Boston Scott, I think, are going to have a role in the regular season. Of course, they're going to get first team reps, So of course, Miles Sanders is going to get some reps with the second team. It's not the craziest thing in the world. I just thought it was confirming that it's going to be a three-way backfield. And I think that's the way you've seen it all along, Evan. I agree with you that Miles is by far the most talented back here, but I do think that they like Kenny Gainwell, they like Boston Scott, and those guys are going to play. So what was your reaction to all this stuff around Miles Sanders, quote unquote, second stringer last week.
And then Nick Sirianni came out and said, Miles is our guy. You know, I mean, they're just giving all they consider them all to be like first team players. You know, Kenneth Gainwell earned a fairly significant role last year, and there's no reason to expect that to get smaller. And then Boston Scott has been around the team. I mean, he's like a trusted veteran. So it's not surprising that they'd all be getting first and second team reps. And Miles Sanders he's been really efficient. I mean, he's at like 5.5 yards per carry over the last 2 seasons. We've talked ad nauseum about how we expect this offensive line to be a kick-ass unit. Jalen Hurts is a dual threat quarterback. Like, they have all the elements of like an elite rushing offense. And Miles Sanders, I think, is entrenched as the lead back. Despite this camp report, I think he's locked in as the lead back in, maybe one of the best rushing offenses in the league. And therefore, I'm going to continue drafting him in the 7th round.
Yeah. Evan is still about 10 spots ahead of market on Miles Sanders in his rankings. We've talked about it a lot, Evan. I mean, my concern is just, hey, 2-man backfields, that's today's NFL. 3-man backfields, that starts to become a real concern, particularly if Miles Sanders isn't going to play on pass downs. And I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to have a very high throw rate at running backs either. And so those are concerns for me on Miles Sanders. But yeah, I think he's very clearly the most talented guy there. Let's go to Zeke. So I feel like you're back in on Zeke, Evan. And I didn't expect this. I didn't expect this turn of events
Neither
in
did
the
I.
offseason. And so Zeke, neither did I. And Zeke, it's every year this happens where like everybody's excited about Tony Pollard, and the Cowboys come in and be like, Zeke's our guy, Zeke's the cornerstone, Zeke's our key. And we knew this was coming. We knew they were going to say last year was a result of the PCL. I still think that Tony Pollard is a better player. I still think that the team might not be nearly as good, and therefore they're going to have to make some changes offensively at some point during the year. So Zeke still scares me, but it sounds like you still have an appetite for him on some level. What do you think about all the Zeke stuff?
Yeah, because he's starting to fall into the 4th round. I mean, no one wants to draft Ezekiel Elliott this year. And I mean, I get it to some extent, but there are also reasons to explain away, and nobody's done a better job of this than Jerry Jones, to explain away his struggles. And last year was the PCL injury, and now he's in the best shape of his life, and he's past the PCL injury, and they have a high level of commitment to him. I think he's certainly going to get all of September to show that he can get back. He's not that old. Oh. He's like 26 or 27. Yeah. But I think he's going to, at very least, can get all of September to show that he can, still be a bell cow back and be an every down back. And I think at some point the coaches might have to make a change. But if he's going the 4th round, like, he's still got the potential to score 12, 13, 14, 15 touchdowns. Like, that's very much in his range of potential outcomes.
Oh, there's absolutely zero doubt about that. I do think that like all the Cowboys injury stuff maybe opens up room for Tony Pollard and Zeke to both be winners at their ADP. Like
that's the thing. I mean, if you can get Zeke in the 4th and Pollard in, I don't know, 8th, 9th, like, they can absolutely both be ADP beaters.
Yeah. Let's go to Mike Gesicki. I know you tweeted about this one, Evan. Mike Gesicki, shout out Penn State. We already talked about Miles Sanders and Chris Godwin, shout out Penn State. Now, this Mike Gesicki stuff that does not sound good. We know tight ends block in the Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan offense. They left George Kittle into block, way more than we would have liked in San Francisco. Mike Gesicki is not nearly the player that George Kittle is, but I'm not sure Mike Gesicki is a blocker like George Kittle is either. So I was a little bit surprised that hearing Mike Gesicki say, hey, I hardly ran any routes today. My role is going to be more blocking here. I don't know if that's camp noise or if that's real. What was your reaction to the Gesicki stuff?
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's become pretty clear that like they never even considered giving Mike Gesicki a long-term deal. They gave him the franchise tag. That's a 1-year thing, but there weren't even any contract negotiations apparently. And that deadline has now passed for franchise tag players to sign long-term extensions. So he's on a prove-it deal, essentially. And the offense is changing. I worry about him like losing snaps to Durham Smythe and Hunter Long, tight ends that can actually block, because that's not Mike Gesicki's game at all. I mean, it's not like they're going to turn him into a blocker in one training camp. Right. I think he's like a full fade for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Mike Gesicki was appetizing to me last season because he was essentially an oversized wideout. He literally like barely lined up in line. He was like a slot wide receiver or even a wide receiver for most of the year last year. And so you're getting to play essentially a wide receiver at the tight end position. If that's not going to be the case this year, that's going to be a problem for sure.
Yeah. The offense is just going to be built around run after catch opportunities to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
And, with some Chase Edmonds mixed in and not a whole lot of Gesicki, I don't think.
Let's go to the Broncos stuff. I mean, one of the biggest debates of the fantasy football season has been how much will Javonte separate from Melvin Gordon, if at all. There's been conflicting reports in the media about how much Melvin Gordon is working in with the first team. Cecil Lammey, who we've known for a long time as a reporter / fantasy guy around the Denver Broncos, he is firmly in the camp that Javonte is going to separate massively this year. Others, Benjamin Albright, some others from Denver Post are saying, well, hold on a second. Melvin is working in just as much. They think it's going to be more like 50-50 or 55-45. I'm tempted to lean more with the conservative nature of the split to start 50-50, 55-45 in favor of Javonte. But if Cecil's right, Javonte should be going in like round one. So it's definitely a tricky situation. What do you think about all the Broncos running back stuff?
Yeah, it's tricky. And just trying to, I'll say this. I think that it's another situation where both guys could actually beat their ADPs because Melvin Gordon is very cheap in drafts. And I've continued to draft him, 9th, 10th round, like absolutely. Because Cecil even suggested that he could get cut, which is something we talked about last offseason, but then we got information that wasn't going to happen. But I think that if he were to get, like Cecil mentioned, the possibility of him going to New Orleans if Alvin Kamara were to be suspended. They do have Mike Boone, who was brought in by George Patton from Minnesota. They came together. But I think ultimately it's most likely that they're just going to keep the veteran, and I mean, he's a reliable guy. He's coming off a solid season. He's still a pretty good player. Yeah. Melvin Gordon is. But I do think it's another situation where they could both beat their ADPs. Javonte Williams could – what Cecil Lammey is saying right now in his most recent is that he thinks that it could be 70% Javonte, 30% Melvin Gordon. And I think that is a reasonable expectation. I don't know. I'm continuing to draft them both, though, because I like investing in this offense right now with the addition of Russell Wilson and – moving on from that super old coaching staff.
Yep. And I we'll talk more about my Javonte take in the next podcast. I do have him somewhere in round 2. Stay tuned to find out exactly where, but we'll talk more about that then. Let's go to Wan'Dale. So Wan'Dale Robinson, sometimes with rookies, they don't let them open camp with the starters right away. Like, it's just like, you're a rookie, you're going to have to quote unquote earn it, even if you're a second round pick, even if you're a first round pick, whatever. They didn't make them do that with Wan'Dale. Wan'Dale opened camp with the starters right away next to Golladay and Kadarius Toney. And then we also have Darius Slayton running exclusively with the second or third team. Darius Slayton, as we've talked about, major candidate to be traded or get cut. It's rare for me to be excited about like someone who's 5'8" wide receiver. But I feel like Daboll has tricks up his sleeve in a big way for Wan'Dale. He would not have used second round draft cap on him if he didn't. And obviously I'm excited about the potential for Danny Dimes and this passing offense. So I've been like, I get Danny Dimes and Wan'Dale so they're both so cheap, and I get them so often in best ball stacks. It's like actually scary. But any new takes or fresh takes on Wan'Dale or what's going on with the Giants wideouts?
I think that this is the way that the Giants want their 3 receiver set to be when they open the season, and that will be Wan'Dale in the slot, Kadarius Toney as the movement Z receiver, and Kenny Golladay as like the big perimeter presence on the outside. Sort of like, if you wanted to liken it to Brian Daboll's situation in Buffalo, Kenny Golladay would be the Gabe Davis. Wan'Dale Robinson would be the Cole Beasley, Isaiah McKenzie, and Kadarius Toney would be the Stephon Diggs.
Oh, baby. Love it. We've talked a lot about Treylon Burks. I think there was some overreaction to Treylon Burks' asthma, Treylon Burks' mini camp, because he's gotten off to a hot start at Titans camp, and they desperately need him, like in the worst way, to have a big impact in his rookie year. Everybody knows Circa Sports. If you listen to the interview with Jeff Benson, Circa Sports has moved Treylon Burks to the favorite to be offensive rookie of the year in their market. Not that those markets are efficient at all. I just thought it was notable. But man, they need him so bad. I know he's a very polarizing prospect. I know you moved him way down, Evan. We've been trying to coax you into moving him back up. Is it working at all?
Yeah, I'm going to capitulate on this one. I mean, Leone just wore me out. I mean, he just wore me down. So I'm going to make the change today. I was going to make it yesterday, but I got caught up in team previews. I'm going to make the change today, and Treylon Burks will be back in, a solidly draftable range.
Yeah.
I like hearing the positive camp reports, especially after he had kind of a tumultuous offseason. The assessments of his game from Mike Renner and Matt Harmon, neither of which were very positive about Treylon Burks. Those kind of stick in my mind. But man, I mean, he's a first-round pick with a ton of opportunity. He's playing well in camp right now. So, I mean, I get it with Treylon Burks. I get it. It's the Harmon and Renner stuff still bothers me, but I get it.
Yeah, my hesitance on Treylon Burks was never about the asthma or having, missing OTAs or whatever. It was that everybody's just like expecting him to come in and be as good as A.J. Brown. And even when A.J. Brown was on the Titans, I mean, he had some very good games, and he disappeared a lot because of the way they play offense as well. And so, yeah, but, Treylon Burks' ADP obviously dipped and in a big way. And so I think he's certainly back on the radar where he's going now.
And it's another like receiver situation. We've talked about this a lot with the Rams. And we're going to talk about Van Jefferson and his knee issues, but like there's so little target competition behind the top two guys that it, puts them in high target share situations, potentially very high target share situations. And I mean, you look down the depth chart in Tennessee after Robert Woods and Treylon Burks, like it's Nick Westbrook, Ikene, and Racey McMath. I mean, undrafted type guys that, just there should be a level of like locked inness for Treylon Burks atop the depth chart, assuming that his camp continues to go well. And again, he's been playing well early.
Let's go to Pittsburgh. So Chase Claypool banged up his shoulder, but before that, he was in the slot. Deontay Johnson and George Pickens were on the outside. And by the way, George Pickens has been reportedly lighting up camp as well. I talked about a little bit about him on Market Monday as well. But I kind of like this role for Chase Claypool, 6'4", 238. Put him in the slot and let him eat up some smaller guys. What do you think about how the Steelers are lining up with their wide receivers? And by the way, it looks like Mitchell Trubisky almost a lock to start week one. I mean, Kenny Pickett sounds like he's a mess out there.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett sounds like he's been struggling. Apparently Mason Rudolph has been doing well in camp, but yeah, I think there was a report earlier today that like Mitchell Trubisky has been like told that it's his job to lose.
Yeah.
And, I fully expect him to open the season as a starter. But yeah, Chase Claypool, it sounds like his injury is not serious. Maybe just cost him a couple days. But yeah, that's what the three receiver set looks like. Chase Claypool, 6'4", 238 slot receiver, lining up against 5'9" nickel corners. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Go to Washington backfield, Brian Robinson. All these, like, I tweeted something to the effect of, there was a report that Brian Robinson, the Washington expects him to get the short yardage work. And we know J.D. McKissic is going to get the pass down work. So if that's going to be true, it's going to be really hard for Antonio Gibson to score fantasy points because Brian Robinson is likely to get goal line work. And then all the pass down 2 minutes going to go to J.D. McKissic. What does that leave Antonio Gibson with? Now, everybody came back into my mentions. I mean, there were some really angry people. Brian Robinson was a fifth-year senior. Have you even watched his tape? But I don't need to watch the tape. Washington spent a round 3 pick on Brian Robinson. Clearly, they think that the dude could play in college no matter what you thought of him. It doesn't really matter what you thought of him. It matters what Washington football team or the Commanders or whatever they're calling themselves thought of him. So Antonio Gibson, I think is a talented dude, but they clearly don't trust him in passing situations. I mean, they were desperate to get McKissic back, and then they used round 3 draft pick on a big back to play in short yardage. So I don't know where that leaves Antonio Gibson. What do you think about what's going on in the Washington backfield?
That layer of analysis that you mentioned, like talking about that, how he's like a fifth-year senior, that's the dynasty version analysis bleeding into redraft analysis.
Yeah.
That's exactly what that is. which, that's fine in terms of dynasty analysis, but that doesn't really matter for us in redraft as much. I mean, we probably all agree that Brian Robinson isn't going to be some superstar. Okay. But it matters because they used a 3rd-round pick on him. They've already come up with a role for him, and it's the short yardage stuff and potentially goal line stuff. And that kind of stuff does matter for redraft. And that's what we're talking about. And we're not talking about even drafting Brian Robinson. We're just talking about how it's going to affect the other members of the backfield in the short term. And it's just not good news for Antonio Gibson, period. I mean, and he's not a fun guy to draft right now, which sucks because Antonio Gibson is a fun player.
Yeah. Let's go to, I'm almost tired of talking about Rhamondre at this point, but more hype from Rhamondre Stevenson. Peter King says Rhamondre is likely to lead the committee. Peter King was out at Patriots camp. I don't really trust Peter King on depth chart and player valuation stuff, player usage valuation stuff. I just thought it was worth noting. We've already said our piece on Rhamondre, and at this point, his ADP has spiked to the point where I'm actually getting less and less of Rhamondre now, where I was just, before it was like every draft I was getting Rhamondre. But, it's just a market, and that's the way it goes. I think in home leagues, Rhamondre will be cheaper than he is on sites like Underdog right now. Anything to add there?
I mean, this is sort of just a confirmation bias thing right now with the Peter King stuff, but there have been enough indications from not only Peter King, but also from the Boston Herald and, other Patriots reporters. There have been enough indications that Rhamondre Stevenson could leapfrog Damian Harris that, I moved Rhamondre Stevenson ahead of Damian Harris in my rankings.
Yep. All right. You mentioned Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson underwent knee surgery. Sounds like a scope of some kind. To me, he's questionable for week 1. I mean, they blew it, man. They were like, oh, we're finally going to make a draft pick. We're gonna make a draft pick. It's going to be in the 2nd round, and it's going to be a 5'8", 155-pound wide receiver, whatever he is, in Tutu Atwell. And it's like, oh, and everybody, and this is not hindsight. Everybody at the time was like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is a disaster. And now with Van Jefferson hurt, they have no one, and they blew this pick on Tutu Atwell. He can't play in the NFL wide receiver. So, like you mentioned, target competition is really opening up for Allen Robinson, for Cooper Kupp. Any thoughts on the thought of Van's injury?
This would be his 2nd knee surgery of the offseason. So that's never good. Even if they say, oh, he should be back around or by week 1, we don't want our wide receivers having double knee surgery, in the offseason, especially that the reason that it would be because the first surgery didn't fix the problem. So he had to have another surgery. That can't be good. Right. Yeah. And then, you mentioned Tutu Atwell. According to the LA Times, Ben Skoranek is ahead of Tutu Atwell. And Ben Skoranek was you want to talk about a 5th-year senior. He played at Northwestern for 4 years. Then he went and played at Notre Dame. He was a role player at Notre Dame. He's really supposed to be a special teamer. I think it should serve as an indication that the Rams need to re-sign Odell Beckham, but we also know that he's probably not going to be ready for a while himself.
Yeah. I think they probably are interested in Odell Beckham, but I don't think he'll have an impact until December, playoff type time. Let's go to Packers wideout. So Christian Watson underwent knee surgery. We found out as camp opened, and he's going to be out a few weeks, they say. Certainly not a good thing for a player coming from an FCS school, a really run-heavy FCS school, trying to earn Aaron Rodgers' trust, which is a hard thing to do. Now he has surgery. To me, Christian Watson is borderline. I just have no interest in drafting him whatsoever. I do have some interest at ADP in Romeo Doubs, who's allegedly been lighting up Packers camp and has a ton of opportunity. I'm not sure Alan Lazard is that dude. We know who Randall Cobb is at this point. Maybe Romeo Doubs somehow gets into Aaron Rodgers' good graces. Where you at on Packers wide receivers?
Very similar to you. Pulled Christian Watson out of the top 150 immediately, and that's kind of depressing for a player who was drafted in the top 35 and is going to play with Aaron Rodgers, and we're already out on him.
Yeah.
He's probably a buy in Dynasty, but I wouldn't. I'm not touching him in redraft right now. Romeo Doubs. Hey, we've been talking about this guy since the draft. He had a lot of college production. That's always a good indication for a player's, projectability into the NFL. And I think he's really interesting. He's a really good athlete as well. I mean, he checks a lot of boxes for, a classic late round sleeper. I mean, he should be taken in every draft at this point. Are you going to be able to talk yourself into Sammy Watkins at any point this year?
I'd rather draft Randall Cobb. I mean, it makes me throw up,
Okay.
but I think Randall Cobb has a chance to like actually catch like 70 balls and he's like free, So
Yep. Okay.
it's not fun, it's not exciting, but there's a pretty good floor I think on Randall Cobb. I don't think Sammy Watkins is going to be for me, but
okay.
Two more here that we added today. First, Irv Smith underwent thumb surgery, we found out, and God, I mean, I was so excited for this guy, and they say he's probably gonna be back by week 1, and that's great and all, but it just sucks to like miss all of camp, and you're a receiver, you're a pass catcher, now you have thumb surgery, and it's just not great because I take him so much as my late round tight end. Also, confirmation out of Vikings camp that KJ Osborne is locked into the number 3 role as expected. It's just important because we expect him to play way more 3 wide receiver sets, and Adam Thielen is absolutely ticking in the age model as well. And so I like late round stabs on KJ Osborne, but any reaction to the Irv Smith stuff or KJ Osborne stuff from today?
Well, it'd be interesting to see if they go like get someone else at tight end, like go sign Eric Ebron or something like that, because they have very little depth at tight end. They got Johnny Munt and like Ben Ellefson. That will give us an indication of how they really feel about Irv Smith's recovery timeline.
Yep. Last one. Sad one, because I do think Tim Patrick can ball. Evan mentioned at the top, scary scene for Tim Patrick today at Broncos camp. I mean, I never want to see a guy get hurt, but the Broncos needed to be thinned out because they were so loaded. I don't know how long Tim Patrick's going to be out for, but this could clean up a lot of stuff. Let's assume for now that Tim Patrick's injury is as bad as it seems. What would your reaction be in terms of Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, anybody else like that?
KJ Hamler definitely moves up, and he just got cleared for practice. He's dealt with a bunch of injuries, but he's ready to roll now. And that dude's got some speed. And Russell Wilson, over the past 5, 6, 7 years, like there haven't been many better deep ball throwers than Russell Wilson. So KJ Hamler gets a big bump. I think that the Broncos could look at more 2 tight end sets with Albert O and Greg Dulcich. Dulcich is also back practicing. He got injured at minicamp. At least he's back into individual drills, so he's still working his way back. But yeah, more 2 tight end sets potentially. And I think that it solidifies to an extent Jerry Jeudy, because there had been some indications that Jerry Jeudy might not open as the locked-in number 2 receiver because Tim Patrick's a better blocker, and Jerry Judy's probably going to primarily play in the slot, and that could cut into Jerry Jeudy's snaps. But I think now we can lock in for sure Jerry Jeudy into a full-time role, and I think that adds an element of confidence that may have been shaky previously.
Yeah, I think the Tim Patrick news will fly under the radar for a lot of people. To me, it has a really, really big impact on a lot of things going on with Denver. So we'll be watching that closely for sure.
Yeah. It kind of flew under the radar, but late last season, the Broncos gave Tim Patrick like a pretty sizable contract extension. I mean, they know that he can ball.
For sure. All right. There's been a ton of news. We covered it all here today. Hope this was helpful for you guys. If you're on YouTube, let us know in the comments if there's anything else you would like us to cover for sure. We'll be back next episode to reveal and discuss our round 2 rankings for the 2022 fantasy football season. Check out the draft kit so Evan can continue his massacre of Cubs games. 4. Evan. 4. Producer Luke, I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.